Yeah, so I'm going to talk about controlled traffic and soil in general with you today. Any of you reckon you're doing controlled traffic already? One? Oh, I was hoping you'd all say it and just go home and say that's fine. Yeah, good. Okay, excellent. Well, you can correct me when I go wrong, okay? Which will probably be quite frequently. So I want to acknowledge, first of all, the people we've been involved in. We've got this project going and we're involved with quite a lot of different farming groups, including this one here and the lovely, parrot, cockatoo, what is it?
Cockatoo.
Cockatoo.
Major Mitchell.
Major Mitchell cockatoo? Yeah.
They eat crops, I don't know why.
Because they don't eat scientists, that's my opinion. Just a crowd does that. Yeah, but we're involved with a whole range of farming groups, right from South Australia through to here, through Victoria and stuff like that. So it's a whole southern region project. So and acknowledge GRDC and my own agency and the other agencies that have funded this project, and also all the team of scientists that work on it. Okay, I suppose sort of pre-GPS, global positioning systems and auto steer, we tended to call our farming system random traffic farming. It might have been slightly controlled a bit, but generally that was the term we gave it. And generally we reckon that probably greater than 70% of the area in each paddock would be trafficked by a pair of heavy wheels every year. So after a number of years, you'd expect 100% of your paddock to be trafficked, and that would go on every year and build up on your traffic. That's sort of, I suppose, the traditional sort of thoughts around farming and traffic control. But we did a survey at the start of our project to find out exactly what the current situation is. Now, these pictures here, I hope you can see, show the wheel tracks. This is two different farmers, the bottom one and the top one, and show the wheel tracks of their different implements that are running over their field. This is current data, not old data. So the white patches are the area that doesn't get traffic in a single year. What percentage do you think, top one or bottom one, is not trafficked in those areas, do you reckon?
Maybe about 10.
About 10% not trafficked, so about 90% trafficked. Anyone else?
Okay, well, 30.
30% not trafficked. Yep. Do you reckon they're both the same? Yes, no? No? About the same? Well, actually, you're quite close. They're about 72% trafficked. About 65% traffic. Okay, so less traffic than you think, but still pretty high. So that's the sort of current non-people in control traffic farming. So even with about 64% traffic each year, you can imagine unless you're controlling that, you be sure that you'll go back down each of those each year, which most people aren't doing that accurately if they're in this sort of system. You'd expect that over a couple of years, a few years, you will again still be compacting or trafficking over most of your area each year. So things haven't changed very much on that system. Anybody help with the lights out? Anybody tell me what they reckon that's a photograph of?
Wheel tracks.
Wheel tracks. Yes, very good. Wheel tracks. How do you think we got that photograph?
Water or wind. Blew it away.
Yeah, exactly. Who said that? Yeah. Well, quick then, you can't answer all the questions. That's exactly what's happened here. So sheet erosion, the water has washed away all the area that's not been compacted by wheel tracks. So you can see there, literally, how many wheel tracks there are crisscrossing across this paddock, compacting the soil. And one of the early talks we gave, the lady said, well, it's a good job we're wheeling over our fields then, isn't it? But that's not really the idea. We're not supposed to have sheet erosion. And you can imagine if the water erosion didn't erode any of this stuff, then how tough it's also going to be for plants to grow in it. That's the take-home message from that picture. This is a more scientific picture. This shows here the white in these pictures is the air pockets in the soil, which are really important, as you all know, for drainage, for holding water, for gas diffusion, for all the biological processes that occur in the soil. This is a traditional paddock, and you can see down in the lower parts of the soil, down below about 12 centimetres, almost no pore spaces there at all. This is a photograph taken after 4 years of controlled traffic. Now, not all soils will recover quickly in 4 years like that. This particular soil has, but it's a stark contrast to show you what's happening, below the soil that you can't normally see.
Sorry.
Yeah, do please interrupt.
Is there much of a difference on, say, self-mulching, cracking, less clay-based soils than what there is on their red shallow soils with a clay base?
Well, there would be, and that's one of the reasons we're looking at this project, is to see what different soil types might do. But certainly, the perceived wisdom is, if you have a self-mulching soil that will swell and shrink and crack and fracture over years, that if you've compacted it, you can expect if you stop compacting it that it's going to start recovering much quicker than some of the soils that don't shrink and swell. And one of the questions, most of our sites around sandy soils, of course, don't shift at all, and whether they will recover at all, or how quickly, you're really probably relying not on soil processes but plant processes to make those areas recover. So putting down roots that can gradually make those pore spaces that you're not then recompacting with traffic. But yeah, it's a good question, and those differences will be really important, probably around how quickly you see the benefits around controlled traffic. So this is a picture showing, so most of this stuff is just sort of academic work, and it's not from our particular project, but it's an introduction for you. It's showing earthworm counts, and to show you how that sort of lack of oxygen that you get in compacted soils, how bad it is for the biological life, and I'm sure you all believe that the biological life is what sustains your crops, so it's very important. So earthworms in a controlled traffic system, many times more than in a random traffic type situation. And this shows plant available water capacity, which is sort of more in my area. Being able to drive up the size of the bucket in any particular soil is, really important. Perhaps not in a year like this year, but this main project that we're looking at is for low rainfall zones, and it's the crops are really restricted. Their potential yield is restricted by the size of the bucket that any particular soil has. So being able to almost double the amount of potential water that can be held in that soil is critically important for increasing potential yields. This is what happens when soils hit a compacted layer. It might sound like your soil's a bit like this. This is not necessarily compaction due to traffic. A lot of this is compaction due to natural soil changes. These are actually soils in Western Australia, but one of the reasons why I particularly like this slide is people often talk about biological drillers. Soil plants will just drill through anything and just plant these 1 year and then my soil's all back to great health. Well, these things, canola, lucerne, they struggle to go through compacted soils as well, and often are in fact just looking for preferential pathways from previous crops, or often from old native vegetation pores that go through these sorts of soils as well. So I'm not saying they're not important in terms of trying to keep open those pores, but once it gets really compacted, even these natural processes that we need to rely on, particularly in soils that don't shrink and swell, can take many, many years to recover. This shows emergence, so it's not just the deep processes and the roots that compaction trafficking can affect, but it's also the surface type of issues, crusting and compaction at the surface. This graph shows the emergence index, or the amount of emergence days after planting, and with different levels of compaction. So this is a low level compaction, or low level, I shouldn't say compaction because we didn't measure compaction, low level of trafficking, low tractor weight. So 5 tonnes axle weight, 9 tonnes axle weight, 14 tonnes axle weight. And although the total emergence difference isn't huge in this particular case, the rate of emergence has been greatly affected from being almost full emergence after 23 days to only being half emergence at 23 days. And if you remember that picture, that graph, I'll show you some photographs in a minute from this region where we've looked at the same issue. And of course, the infiltration rate, important this year. The infiltration rate is much higher when you're not compacting that surface again, so you're less likely to see situations like this or puddling like that. We can get the soil in faster before it evaporates or before it causes structural decline in the surface. Okay, so those are all the sort of issues that trafficking can cause. Ultimately, this affects yields, and that's what mainly you're interested in. What this sort of shows is they reckon that sort of about 15% of yield loss can be had through compaction. And what this graph is trying to show is that you can have compaction in the surface, or you can have compaction a bit deeper, or you can have compaction very deep. And the problem is the compaction near the surface is what they've symbolized by this amount here. And with a bit of tillage and sowing and stuff, you can quickly get rid of it. After 5 years, you've probably got rid of that compaction. The compaction that's a bit deeper, well, because you're not putting down tines down there, it's going to take quite a long time, as I showed, for those roots to get down there, or for earthworms to get down there, unless you want to sort of put through soilers or something like that. The process to relieve that compaction, if you've already got it there, is, you're more likely to take sort of 10 years to get. And then this graph sort of illustrates that if the compaction is very, very deep, it might never happen. I would say that it probably would happen, but you probably need to plant things like native shrubs back on there again to get down when they have opportunistically down into those deeper layers and break it up. And I can remember in Western Australia digging down roots, and on those very hostile compacted soils, and all the crop roots are following the roots from the native vegetation that was cleared like 100 years ago, but it's still there. But one of the issues I often think of that these sort of soils, again, that suffer in the years is, as we go another 100 years, those roots are going to have decayed completely, and then your roots are really going to suffer what they're going to go down unless we think about the farming systems that will prevent that. Why this compaction down deeper is so important to think about. Oh, okay. This was another slide. I was going to just say that you can, with that first slide, you can get into a spiral of degradation if you're not careful, where you're putting on equipment that causes compaction, and you're putting in tillage to try and relieve that compaction, but that causes more compaction, and you can end up in a spiral of damage. But why that compaction that's deeper down is so important is because the heavier the axle load is that we use on our equipment, the deeper the compaction goes. So if you go from a 5-ton axle load to a 10-ton axle load, instead of your compaction being in the top 12 inches or so, you're getting down to compaction down 2 foot or more deep, which is starting to get very hard to correct. And we all know axle loads are tending to go up and up and up. So, we started off with very low axle loads. 5 tonnes would be typical now, greater than 15 tonnes. Probably not many people here yet using that sort of equipment, but we're linearly increasing our axle loads, and therefore we are driving that compaction deeper and deeper into our soils.
I suppose when we have a look at the impact, we've got I used to take a little bit like that, each one's this wide. We're still getting the compaction, but we're spreading it over wide
I'm glad you asked that question. Spreading it over a larger area. So, the difference between narrow wheels and wide low flotation wheels or duals or something like that. So, the theory tells us, yes, by doing that we get less compaction underneath the wheel. So if you ran this over and you look down here, you find that, yeah, the low compaction wheels spread it around and there's less compaction. The problem is, they don't change the compaction down deeper. So the amount of compaction you get down deeper stays the same. So they relieve the compaction up near the surface, but they still transmit that load down to depth. So
when you say 15-ton axle load, does that halve the weight of each wheel when you have twice as many wheels?
no, it doesn't matter. So if it's actual load on the load-bearing two wheels that you have it on.
It's a total load over the wide area.
It's only over a wider area if you're using more tyres, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is the theory of compaction, that doesn't affect it. So if you have this is like with sheep, why they don't cause much compaction, because although they cause a lot of pressure underneath them, the depth of their compaction is very shallow. Okay? If you spread it out over wider loads, you relieve the shallow compaction, but the cumulative compaction down at depth is still the same. So what you do is you see far less compaction. If you just dig it up with your hands and look at it, you'll say, yeah, this is not being compacted so much. If you dig down to a deeper layer, the amount of compaction is the same.
Hard to believe.
It is very hard to believe. Even as a sort of scientist, I find it hard to believe myself. I should try and think of some good ways to...
I'm just looking at the right-hand side here. At peak stress narrow tyre, wide tyre.
Yeah.
Is that PSI pressure on the ground?
That's not actually, it's a simulation. That's actually the force to push a cone index in. So it's a measure of the compaction that's occurred. So what it's saying is that with the flotation tyres, the amount of compaction down here has got a lot less than with the narrow time. So it hasn't compacted this soil nearly as much. But the problem is when you get down here, you can see there's almost no difference between the two tyres. It's sort of like, I don't know if this is a very good analogy, but if you have a spring or a sponge and a narrow sponge or a wide sponge, when you hold a hand underneath it, I suppose, if you compact it, if you press down on the top, you'll find it'll deform less up at the top if it's a wide sponge. But you're not compacting it over a wide area, so that's right, you're compacting it down the track, which is exactly what you want to do. So from a control traffic point of view, that's right, they're ideal from that sense, because the amount of area of your pallet, remember we had that 64% in those drawings, well, with big duals, that's quite a large percentage. You bring that down to a track that's spread its weight out that way, you're still compacting a very little amount of your field, so absolutely good point, yeah. So,
and with this same thing, in a damper situation where you're seeding in on wet soils, how's your compaction compared to, say, in the drier topsoils?
Good, glad you asked that. Wet soils. So the traditional theory sort of says that we do about 80% of our compaction in the first pass, okay? And then, so if people say to you, oh, yeah, I only drove over it once, so it probably didn't matter, well, that's probably not true, because we generally say, diminishing returns. If you've driven over it once, you might as well drive over it another 10 times. So what this graph is showing is what the bulk density. Is everyone familiar with the term bulk density? Sort of that's how loose the soil is in a unit volume. So the higher the bulk density, the more compacted the soil is. So this is the bulk density with depth. So it tends to obviously get more compacted with depth naturally, soils do. So this is the natural soil. Then this is after you passed it, 1 pass, 2 passes, 4 passes, 8 passes, and you can see it doesn't make much difference. So you're doing most of the damage in the first pass. But that does tend to be on wet soils. If you've got a much drier soil, you actually do much less damage on the first pass. So yes, if you're driving on wet soils, you're going to do much more damage, and you're going to do that damage straight away. So the sort of theory sort of goes: reduce your axle weight, reduce your soil water content when you go over it. Those are the sort of two golden rules for reducing compaction. And water, again, not only do you, when you're wet, the first load, the first pass does most of the damage. As it gets wetter, it goes deeper and deeper. So you're passing more of that force down deeper. The force is actually transmitted through the water down deeper because water's not compressible. So the wetter the soil, not only are you doing damage first time, but you're doing damage deeper and deeper. So it's a very good question. I love this slide because years and years ago, there's a few people with hair as grey as mine. I don't know if any of those remember seeing sort of rallies or anything like that. The old ploughing systems, traction engine ploughing systems. Has anyone heard of those?
I've heard of it,
Never seen it actually done. I've seen it done, but in demonstrations in England, they have traction engines. They have what they call steam rallies, where people with steam cars and steam tractors and everything steam turn up. And this is a fantastic system. What they do is they have a tractor at one end and then they have a tractor at the other end, and the cable that just pulls it along. And then when it gets to this end, that one tips down, this one tips up. They move along and they just pull it back again. And no compaction, perfect for our soils. Though, we're going back to what we knew before. But the main reason was those were so heavy, that they felt, they couldn't get them on the land. It was only when they got to a certain weight, we suddenly said, why don't we push that on there? And of course now they're going back to being that weight sort of thing. People have looked at doing that again now, reinventing that. You probably can't make out this slide very much, but when I was doing my PhD in America, this was what one of the professors was trying to do. He was using like a parallel move irrigation system with a cable with some implements here and towing it along backwards and forwards and moving along. As far as I know, no colour has picked it up yet, John Deere or Wesley Ferguson or anything, but it is a perfect way if we want to try and reduce our compaction. Okay, so I'll now move on to a bit more about what we're actually doing, what more conventional controlled traffic is about. So the idea of controlled traffic is that it's a system built on permanent wheel tracks, so that they're permanent from 1 year to the next year. And so the area that's cropped and the area that the traffic are separated. And the other sort of key thing about it is you try and minimise the amount of area that is dedicated to traffic. So crop growing and traction, I mean they're opposite things when you think about them. When you want traction, that's really good for driving something on. No slip, very little rolling resistance for your tyres, very efficient for fuel use. Growing crops, not so good. And so what's good for growing crops is not good for that. So it's an obvious split when you think about it, to try and keep those two things separate. And that's what Scott was saying earlier about, he's heard that this year it's been particularly wet. People who've had those wheel tracks have been able to get out and spray and do things when other people haven't. So
I've seen the bloke between Eyre and Forbes that's got them, and he's using them so much in the wet that that's the only bit where the water lays now. Like, you sort of, I've seen him spraying there, water flying everywhere and that, and then every time it rains they fill up with water and the rest of the paddocks not, so you can sort of push them too far, can't you?
well, yeah, that's an interesting question, but he's still getting through them.
Yeah.
So it's like water on here, you can still get through it. Whether you do, if you think there's going to be a fair bit of surface runoff onto them, then you do need to be able to manage that water. So you do need to think about contours and things like that. So, and certainly up in Queensland, they have to put a lot of thought into the layout of those tracks for that reason. There's some great pictures of permanent traffic, controlled traffic in Queensland causing that sort of erosion we saw earlier, because the water, as you say, builds up in these gullies and dams, and then they, cause terrific, powerful erosion and problems. So yeah, it's certainly an issue you have to manage quite carefully.
We don't get that much in because it's too flat to run. It's too flat.
Yeah. In which case, probably, although the water would appear to be there, it probably, if he's getting through, isn't such a big issue.
But that's only spraying. They do get to a stage where they get out of control. And when he goes to crop it next year, the ground out very clean, they'll still be watering those fields.
Will that be a problem?
Well, I think so.
Why?
Because you won't get any traction.
Well, he probably will, because it's hard. You can have water on this concrete. Look, the possibly are issues around that with water laying around. I don't know, but
I've seen it where it runs into trouble in Mallee area in wet times because their tracks get so good that they then have to go back and rework the tracks to pull them back in.
Yeah, the guys, we've done some reviews, some case studies with farmers doing controlled traffic farming. There's one guy down in Eyre in particular. He said about every 8 years he needs to renovate. But he actually sees that as an advantage, because he'll use that renovation period to apply lime, and maybe also, because he's a 100% cropper, he doesn't run livestock. So he'll use that as a chance to apply lime and to maybe incorporate pre-emergent herbicide to break his herbicide cycle. So he uses that as an opportunity.
I thought it was actually at SARDI, they had rivers running 20 metres in front of their tractor because the lines are full of water and they're still getting through it, but no one else can get on their paddocks.
But it's getting worse, it's progressing.
Oh yeah.
But there's also
less
resistance too behind the tractor. There's less resistance.
The ground's softer elsewhere.
Yeah.
it is progressively getting worse. I mean, I'm not knocking what you're saying.
No, but
It does progressively get worse till it gets to a state where you can do something about it.
yeah, I've not seen anyone that's got that deep a wheel ruts in controlled traffic. So it'll be interesting to see. The worst I've seen is where the wheel ruts tend to blow out, so they'll get deep due to wind erosion and things like that, and they certainly do have to go in and renovate those, and that's one of the issues we've been sort of looking at is how to manage that. So how to manage your wheel tracks to prevent these sorts of things happening is still a progressing science, I suppose. We still don't know enough about it to do that, but I suppose all the anecdotal evidence is that it saves on timeliness in most years. Now, how bad and how quickly it gets too bad, and then what you do about it, and what sort of control measures you can make to slow down that sort of damage to it are legitimate research questions that we've got to keep looking at to make the system work.
After a year like this, with spraying in crop in particular, I mean, when we're planting, we've got an issue. With spraying in crop, and that has become an issue probably this year, so you'll see a lot of people probably have to go back and renovate their tracks after this season.
Yeah.
There's always aerial spraying too, which can take off the tracks entirely, I suppose.
Yeah.
From what I've seen of though, any issue in the tracks is far outweighed by the improvement in the soil structure outside.
Yeah.
It's just the tracks, at some stage you're going to have to be renovated.
Well, you might need to scrape a bit of soil back into those tracks or something like that from time to time, but the question is whether any of those people would say they you know, the fact that they managed to get on timely in years like this, it was worth the effort to renovate them every 8 years or whatever it might be.
The machinery company is not poor. They're actually making the machine for the actual dirty tracks.
Yeah, well, that's right. And again, you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't know the answers to all these questions yet, and we don't have the equipment that's set up for doing all these things yet. So, I mean, we're still in our infancy in sort of perfecting this sort of system. So you expect, you know, some of these teething problems to come up, and it's good to find out about them. Okay, so this was a picture of the wheel tracks that we saw earlier, about 65% of it. This is one of our more controlled traffic farmers from our survey. Anyone like to have a guess at what percentage is in traffic? 15? 13? 13? Yeah. 10? Yeah, well, 10 is what we're certainly trying to get down to, is 10% or less of the area under wheel tracks. This is actually 22%. Wow. So it's higher than you think, but it was one of our best farmers.
So is the blue lines your chaser bin?
I was asked that at the last talk. I didn't check what they were, but blue is chaser bin, so the dark blue, are they the same colour? I can't even tell. They must be. So they're the chaser bin, yeah. But yours look like, are those too close to you? Yeah, so it's mainly the chaser bin. I'm not quite sure what that was down there.
Well, that's probably the header and the header.
That's the top.
But the chaser bin appears to be in slightly the wrong place, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But he's got to come back again. Where did he come back on the same track?
I didn't analyse this, I just picked it up. I have got the computer file here that does the calculation, I didn't do the practicalities of this. We've got about 200 of these because as part of our survey we said to farmers that if they gave us all their equipment match, we would send them back this to give them an idea of how much trafficking they're doing on their sites, and I probably wish we hadn't because every farmer argues about it. You know, no, I'm not doing that much. You know, I'm doing more than that. So it's been quite a timely thing, but luckily someone else did it, so I can't tell you. So getting around to really our GRDC funded project, this is looking at the adoption of controlled traffic around the states. Queensland has been sort of the key place where it's been adopted. It's up to about 50% now up in Queensland. Maybe, I'm not sure the reason, maybe because they have the heavy soils, maybe because they have the self-motion soils that somebody mentioned, things like that. But what stuck out very much to GRDC was why the big growing areas in South Australia and Victoria, in the Mallee and the Wimmera, is so low, down to 4%. So this project was set up particularly to focus on those areas and to see why it's not been adopted, and try and see if the good reason for adopting it to encourage adoption in those areas.
Can I throw in a reason?
Pardon?
Can I throw in a reason?
Yeah, for
Some of
sure.
those cropping areas, or a lot of those Queensland cropping areas, I think they're continuous cropping and they don't run any livestock.
Well, a lot of these areas in the Wimmera Mallee now are virtually continuous cropping too.
Yeah, but they might be a bit behind those.
Yeah, they've been doing it for longer.
Up there, you don't see many fences.
Yeah.
You see a lot of tree lining, continuous cropping tree lining.
Yeah.
And I think they're just crop rotations, not continuously rotating.
Yeah.
But they started doing it before everybody else did.
Yeah.
It's true, I think. Sorry, Peter, but yeah, that's one thing we found. Again, when we were doing our stubble project for GRDC, we did quite a few case studies, and it was true that the 100% croppers were the first to adapt to it. Mixed farmers that are putting paddocks back into pasture, yeah, not so much. Although there was a really interesting, Peter had a very interesting talk with a mixed farmer at Tullamore the other day. They run Angus starters as well as a commercial herd of cattle, and he sort of, hinted that, you know, they could still do a system of controlled traffic farming and still retain those paddocks of pasture, but still retain that controlled traffic. So it can be utilised. I think people don't realise that it can still be used in a mixed farming situation.
Yeah,
We certainly don't see mixed farming as an objection to or a constraint to adopting controlled traffic. One of the big problems with peers with mixed farming, though, that I hadn't really sort of thought about so much is the issue of trees. And the person will say, well, you know, they can run the cattle on controlled farming and everything, but trying to do controlled traffic and dodge your trees is a bigger issue. And I think that's something that we need to look at more carefully. I mean, what I said then was that really, yes, you might not be able to get down to the 8% of area traffic that you'd expect with a really big field and no other obstacles, but you can still probably get a layout that would reduce it from 64%, which is just, you know, what people are doing as best practice at the moment, down to say 35%, just by making sure that, you know, even if you do have to dodge some things, next year you dodge them exactly the same way, on exactly the same wheel track. So controlled traffic is about minimising the amount of area that you drive over. It doesn't mean you have to get it down to the 8%.
I think we'd be more inclined to do it, except that a lot of, like I'm talking about our local area, a lot of it's been subdivided into small paddocks. On comparison with areas where they continuously cost and put in their tree lines, which are generally bigger, larger, longer runs, whereas we have a lot of small paddocks. It's not that you can't do it, don't get me wrong, it's not that you can't do it. I think we've all the practice because there's a lot of smaller areas.
Yeah.
And we run the tree
There's no inherent reason why you can't do it on small paddocks, but probably maybe the economics of adopting it gets slower, so to move to buying that equipment if you're running small paddocks and small areas might be a bit of a constraint to adoption of it. I can imagine that.
I think it's slightly clear.
Yeah, imagine it. These are some of the constraints that were mentioned to us about why it's not been adopted in our areas. So cost is a very big one, and what you're saying about having small paddocks, that might be an even bigger one. But there you go, managing wheel tracks, as you said, is the second biggest constraint to adopting controlled traffic, which is why, you know, it's really good to hear your comments about different sorts of things. Our main one has been about them blowing out due to wind erosion, not what you're talking about, so really interesting to hear that. But then again, a whole host of ones that's just too difficult, sort of a bit like what you were saying, oh, we only have small paddocks, it's too difficult, you know. So this project's really set up to have a look at these, not particularly the cost, but if we can show there's money in it, then that one takes care of itself. So
They never actually put a read for the cost of moving to CFT, just generally the cost. Like, it depends whether you've already got equipment that's set up to do it, I suppose, or if you've got to go and purchase new equipment to do it.
yeah, these are about the survey. There's questions, I suppose, about the perception farmers have about why they're not seriously getting into it. So I guess when it says cost, they just think, oh, look, I'm not adopting it because it's a cost. It's not necessarily something they've really calculated and worked out, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I can see some costs. For a start, now, an air seeder cart, the wheel tracks in the air seeder cart don't follow the tractor wheel.
Yeah. Change something.
And the big tractor's got big jewels on it, so you've got to come back to single, but then that's actually pulled outside of the top.
Yeah.
But if your air seeder cart doesn't follow the same track, or if your header fronts are different widths to your seeder front, in our case it's not, but again, so there's all sorts of things that people would take into account for the cost.
Yeah.
If your boom probably doesn't double your track width or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a new equipment costs a lot of money.
Yeah, well, of course, you're right, and that's one of the. I mean, I suppose this is what, you know, yourselves as growers do every year. Every time you buy equipment, every time you make modifications, you think, you know, is it worth the money to do it? And I suppose, you know, one of the things we're looking at is, you know, what are the benefits you might expect, and the speed you change depends on, you know, how much, not so much how much money you have, I think, it's how much belief you have that it's going to make improvements, you know.
It's not how much you've got, it's how much you're prepared to spend.
Yeah, that's true, but one of the things is also, you know, if you've got, somebody's got to buy new equipment at some point. If you're heading, if you say, well, my plan is to do that, you know, next time I buy my equipment, you know, it's going to make sure it matches. In other words, I've got a goal, you know, we're going 3 metres. Doesn't mean you have to do it straight away. So some people believe, if you talk to the control traffic farmers that we have, if you talk to Derek Davies that we're working with out at the lake, you know, he would say it's well worth the money for the benefits like you were talking about in the soil, being able to get on time. You know, he's cropping a large area, and he has no problem about spending the money on it. So it's about confidence and belief in the importance of it, as well as, you know, how frequently you change your equipment. You don't have to change it all straight away. Some equipment is just, some equipment you can adapt, some of it's not worth the money to adapt, you know. So it's a complex system, and that's sort of why the project's here, to raise the profile of those sorts of questions. So quickly to the project, we've got 4 sites over at Minnipa in the west, through to Loxton, Swan Hill, and out here with your farming group at Derek's place at the lake. They vary a bit in rainfall across those areas, so Loxton being the lowest, a bit under 200, up to 300 at Lake Angelica. And soil type, so basically starting off at, again at Loxton, these blue lines are the clay content. It's easiest to focus on. Sort of less than 10%. This is with depth at Loxton, so from shallow to deep. Obviously the clay goes up with depth, but only about 10%. Going up a bit higher at Minnipa, a bit higher at Swan Hill, and a bit higher at Lake Angelica. Also very, very little coarse sand at Lake Angelica, so it makes it a heavier sort of soil out there. Okay, so each of these sites, we've imposed 5 treatments in a randomised statistical experiment. We've got the control, which is just farmer practice. And we've then done a whole load of trafficking treatments on it with heavy machinery. So the first one is run the equipment over the soil once, when the soil was dry, and back to your question about wetness, once when it was wetter, and 3 times when it was wetter. And we also had one loosening treatment to try and get rid of some of that, but the loosening treatments haven't, for a whole range of reasons, haven't worked very well. So those are the treatments we're going to look at. So that's basically how we did it. We ran the tractor up and back, compacting these zones, overlapping them, so we got nice uniform compaction underneath those lines. So we did it once for the 1 compaction, and then for 3 times compaction we did it once, and we went back twice, and then 3 times. So we're trying to replicate a sort of very controlled situation of what trafficking would do over a sort of a set area. And these are done on farmers' sites that have been in controlled traffic for as long as possible. So originally this soil, all the controlled soil should be in as good a condition as we can possibly hope for out of it anyway. So this is this is out at Loxton. The equipment, there you go, so he's moved over to tracks. There's a lot of controlled traffic people are gradually getting over there if they can. That's the equipment. We did the compaction full of grain, I think it's about 20 tonnes or something like that. That's what it looks like, putting in the dry compaction treatment. That's what it looks like at the front, overlapping, so we do half at a time, half a wheel track. Very patient, collaborating farmers with us. We've really appreciated the effort they put in for us. That's sort of what the wheel tracks look like afterwards. This is Congelico, just showing the dry compaction and the wet compaction. You can see it did physically look much harder going over it wet than it did when it's going over it dry. That's a different site. Again, the dry, you can see the dry didn't damage too much the standing stubble, whereas when we went over it after it was being a bit moist, it completely destroyed the standing stubble as well. These are some preliminary bulk density figures, so they give an idea of how much we actually achieved compaction. They're not our most accurate data, we're still waiting for that to occur, so there's some errors and anomalies around this data, but it gives an idea that, for example, at Loxton we got sort of perfect what we'd expect. Each time we did more effort on the soil, more trafficking, we made the soil more compacted. So from control, these are all controls. This is Loxton. Did it dry, we compacted it a bit. Did it wet once, we compacted it a bit. Did it wet 3 times, compacted it some more. Congelico, in contrast, these treatments didn't do very much. Control, dry, wet 1, but wet 3 times, as you might have seen from that photograph, appears to have done a lot of compaction. And a mixture of others. Swan Hill seems to have been, that's going to be an anomaly. I think it would have gone like that across there. At Minnepa we got some in the wet, 2 wet treatments, but nothing in the dry treatment. So that's the shallow, that's at 5 centimetres. Similar situation down at 25, but less extreme, like Congelico, showing a steady compaction here. The Loxton site, again, still showing quite a lot of compaction even at 25. But most of the others, the amount of compaction that occurs down at 25 is a lot less, as we'd expect.
Can I just make one comment about...
I thought that meant I had 3 minutes, was it?
The Lake Congelico site. As you guys are all aware, it's been really wet, and I could even tell the difference between compaction treatments walking across the plots, all of the treatments. The ones that hadn't been compacted as heavy, I was thinking it was harder to walk on, and you could clearly feel the difference in the compaction ones. I'm like, oh, it's easier to walk across this paddock. So even just myself, I could detect the compaction difference.
Thanks, Dan. Climate, just to show, it was a typical year in Congelico. So the red line is the long-term average growing season. We've just offset it here to make it easy to read. And we can see it, Congelico it was about perfectly average last year, as it was at Minnepa, but Swan Hill and Loxton were poor seasons last year. And this is what it looked. I've only put in the pictures for Congelico, but this is what I was talking about earlier. Do you remember that graph that I said about how quickly it emerges when it's compacted? This is the same data control versus the 3 times wet. You can see much slower and poorer emergence in the 3 times wet. And when it came to harvest, the same. It was much further behind. The control was had finished off much quicker than the 3 times wet had. So it delayed it right from the beginning. Sowing depth, forget that point. Sowing depth generally got a bit shallower as we compacted it. And that's partly because the equipment was set up for, it's the wide system. It's when they set it up, it's for sowing one particular depth, but when it comes to the harder bits, they tend to ride out a bit. So slightly shallower sowing depth when it came to the compaction treatments. Plant counts were pretty much the same. We had a problem with the wet compaction, very low plant counts, but slightly lower plant counts at Congelico with the compaction, no real difference at the other sandier sites. Congelico was the site that sort of stood out as most different in all these results. I think I'll skip through the dry matter cuts really. Go straight to the yield. So, this is controlled treatments at the 4 sites. Dry compaction, wet compaction, and 3 times compaction. And at all the sites you can see the 3 times compaction was lower than the control treatment, far more marked at Congelico with the heavier soils. Even the dry compaction, wet compaction 1 to 3 compaction, all dropping yields. Same happened, at other sites, but the yields were so low, just over half a tonne. The differences are much smaller in real terms. Minipa didn't do nearly so interesting. As percentages, so even if it was half a tonne, if it was dropped down to a quarter of a tonne, it's 50% change, so it takes out the difference in yields that were there. You can see we've got, with the 3 times wet, percentage-wise, quite big drops in yield in the 3 times wet, 30%, 40% in like Congelico, with the 3 times, more inconsistent with the other compaction treatments or trafficking treatments. Certainly the 1 time wet had effect at most 3 of the sites, not so much there. So I've done a very quick, very rough budget figures. You shouldn't take these as, cast iron, they're based on trial plots and things like that. But you can see obviously those sorts of yield changes, particularly on the sort of heavy soils that you have around that Congelico, could reflect big differences in finances for that farm. So minus $300 a hectare for that 3 times compaction, over $200 for 1 time compaction. And even so, the 3 times compaction at the other sites, all about less $50 a hectare, less yield. So potentially significant sort of benefits from getting rid of compaction, but very sort of tentative figures. What's that? So really that's the trial results. One of the things we are doing is we're measuring a lot of the physical properties there, so we're measuring the soil water content. One of the things we want to be able to do is be able to model these results out so that instead of the results just being applicable to 4 sites. Anyone here familiar with yield profit type modelling stuff done? Yeah. So down at Birchip in Victoria, they now do a lot of modelling for farmers to say, well, if the season's looking like this, what might your yields be expected to do, and do some risk management about how you should manage it. Well, to be able to do that, they need to know how much water is stored in the soils, and we need to know, by doing different compactions, how much the compaction might change those values so that they can get good yield predictions. So a lot of our work is around understanding the basics so that we can get the modelling right. So we can predict the yields. These are yields from Western Australia on low rainfall, light soils, typically 8, 10, 30, 12% differences in yield. So we're hoping that the same things will happen over here well, we don't hope people get yield declines, obviously, but we do hope that it shows benefits for people who want to start adopting controlled traffic. And this year, well, won't be a surprise to anyone. This is the long-term average for Lake Congelico. We're already up here, so we're way above the long-term average. So I don't know whether this is a 1 in a 50 or, as they're talking about in Adelaide, year sort of type of year, but certainly we'll be interested to see what the results do this year at Lake Congelico. So, benefits of controlled traffic. So the idea is spatially separate crop from traffic zones. Being up with softer, more uniform, permanent crop zones, but hard, compacted, permanent traffic lanes, and both of them managed for optimal performance. And that both might require some management. So as you say, the traffic lanes might not just be on their own, they might require management. But the important thing is that we're not just looking at benefits and yields, we need to think of the whole holistic benefits that we're doing, the long-term productivity of your paddocks, the reduction in fuel. We're doing a study at the moment that looks at just how much effort it takes to, you probably haven't heard of rolling resistance, but when you have a tyre and if it's not a solid tyre, if it's a rubber tyre, it bends as it goes flat and underneath it, and that's called rolling resistance, and quite a lot of your fuel goes into overcoming that. And we've done some studies down here at the moment that show that if you're running on those traffic lanes, you can save a fair bit of fuel just by the fact that your tyres aren't having to roll over soft ground. And timeliness, and those sorts of issues. So it's a whole package system. It's very hard for us to evaluate all those different components of it, but we'll be looking at most of those. I think that's it.
Anybody have any questions?
Thanks for all your questions as we went through, so that was really good.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter.